The talk this morning is about how to select a competent safety netting contractor, and I thought it's quite easy really. I just asked some of our QSs within the company, and they send out an inquiry, tell them how big the area is, what you're tied to, what you need for access, size of the building, put it up, take it down. The QSs get the 3 quotes in. Done a good job there. Place the order, £5,000 job done. That's, I think, what a lot of people do when selecting a safety netting contractor. But just imagine, we've just heard Jason. I'm still got shivers from what he had to say. But later that month, if you've procured the netting contractor, one of your guys, one of your workers falls into a safety net. But unfortunately, it's a poorly maintained safety net, and the net fails and the worker falls to the ground. Can you remember him, the guy? You met his wife at the Christmas party. Remember, she's pregnant again, looking forward to a boy, play football with them when they're older. Remember Chris? There he is, one of your best workers. Chris is actually a name of a guy that died on one of our sites on December the 1st, 2003. And he was a great worker, his employer said. So what follows from that? Well, 20 minutes later, after the phone call has gone in to the ambulance service, the murder squad arrive on site. Within the hour, health and safety executive arrive on site and start their investigation. During that time, in the next couple of weeks, the funeral's been arranged, and you decide, are you going? Do you want to go? Do the family and wife, do they want you there? 18 months later, it gets taken to the magistrate's court, and the first thing the health and safety executives say is, I'm sorry, Your Honour, but we can't hear this case in this court because you can't sentence this company on the due to the limits on fines. So it gets passed over to the Crown Court. So 6 months later, after it's been rushed through, settles at the Crown Court, and we've just had, for those who didn't see we've just had Jason Anker who's here to speak. But this guy who fell, this is from the Health and Safety Executive's website, that a contractor from Essex fined £53,000 after a roofer fell 6 metres to his death, sustaining injuries. We just rushed through that from the time of the accident to 2 years later. The company is prosecuted. Jason has just said 14 years to get his compensation. So that's still going on with the family for 14 years. And obviously, if the company survives, then it's still going on in your business with letters and solicitors for 14 years. So good morning. Mark Atkinson, Health and Safety Manager at Clugston's. We are a construction company based predominantly in the northeast, head office in Scunthorpe, strategically placed for our projects at the moment in Oxford and Cannock, putting a few miles on my car. We have a philosophy in Clugston's, which is our PVV. Purpose is to make life easy for our customers, and one of my customers are our site management teams, our QSs and our project managers. We'll evaluate our people, our customers, our suppliers, in fair in our dealings, and health and safety are top priorities, and we try and set and maintain the highest standards possible. So let's go back to basics about selecting a competent netting contractor. What does the law say? For those in construction, we predominantly work around the construction design and management regulations. And they have a 2-stage selection process that advises contractors on how to select other contractors. Stage 1 has got 14 questions in the approved code of practice for how to select an organisation to ensure it's got the arrangements for health and safety to determine if they're sufficient to enable them to carry out the work safely. Stage 2, which I think is more important, has got 1 question in the approved code of practice and find out about the company's experience and track record. The approved code of practice also mentions that organisations like Clugston's, probably like yourself, may use independent accreditation bodies and organisations to assess the competency of the elements of the core criteria. The core criteria is those 14 questions in the back of CDM, commonly known as the Appendix 4. We carry out a lot of work throughout the UK, and if you just take a typical supermarket, £10 million build, there are about 150 contractors that our project manager will actually approve to work on that project. And each contractor has a fine amount of time for which he can spend on selecting that contractor. And I think for the last 20 years, we've been looking at making sure the paperwork's correct, making sure the first part of stage 1 of CDM is right. Does the company have a safety policy? Is it signed by the managing director? Is it dated within the last couple of years? Is it on display in the office reception? Well, that's fantastic, isn't it? We're talking about selecting a safety netting contractor. So we used to spend 80% of our time, of that small amount of time, on paperwork that didn't really mean anything. And then we spent 20% of our time on what really matters. How are you going to do the work? How are you going to ensure that competent people do it? And how do we coordinate your activities on site? We also wanted to recognise in Clugston's, we wanted to change that, and we wanted to recognise achievements by companies and their work that they've done in getting accreditation and reducing bureaucracy and paperwork, and provide support to our site teams and to the supply chain where they followed recognised schemes and procedures. So we've got a typical contractor's 15-page subcontract questionnaire. I think there's about 70 questions on it. But if you hold a Clugston recognised third-party accreditation scheme, and I think we've got 16 that we recognise, you can reduce it down to 4-page, and page 1 is your company details. But when you're working on a Clugston site, you're going to carry out demolition, asbestos, scaffolding or safety netting, we will only allow Federation members. So why have we taken this stance with safety netting? Remember, CDM said that organisations can use independent accreditation organisations to assess the competency. And we did, in the scenario earlier, talk about the guy that fell through the poorly maintained safety nets. A big problem we had was companies coming to site and saying that they were safety netting members because their workforce held a CSCS safety netters card. It is not the case that a person who holds a safety netting card is a safety netting member of the Federation. So can you rely on a facet member? Well, my opinion's yes, but there's obviously some caveats with that. There's always some bad apples in every organisation. There's some bad apples in our organisation, and I think if everyone's honest, there's always some bad apples in everybody's organisation. An organisation can grow beyond its capabilities. One issue that we had many years ago in Facet is that you got audited on application, and then that was it. But when you got audited, when you applied, you probably had 5 or 6 workers, and then you grew over years to having 20, 30 workers working for you. Have you still got the same management systems in place? And in today's environment, companies can often cut corners to survive. So can we really rely on facet members? It's still my opinion that yes, because the law says, CDM says, we've got a duty to make reasonable inquiries. So what is it that Facet's doing for you to ensure that you've made reasonable inquiries? All companies wishing to join Facet are audited to set criteria. The criteria within the Facet audit goes beyond CDM Appendix 4. If you're a new member wishing to join Facet, you are audited on application at 12 months, and then all members are audited at 24 monthly intervals. Audit reports are presented to the board and signed off if there's any remedial actions to be taken. That's actually at the board meetings. And all members must achieve a Facet minimum standard to pass the audit. On application, if they don't meet the minimum standard, then they won't gain membership. If an existing member fails to meet the existing standard, then they will ultimately be excluded from the membership of Facet. I'll come on to the scatter graph, which I think took myself and Tony about 10 weeks to actually produce because we're not very good at computers. But there's 4 key areas of the audit. There's fail, you don't meet the Facet minimum standard. There's pass, which is the minimum standard, and the minimum standard in CDM Appendix 4. Good, you're better than the minimum standard. And excellent, you're actually the best in the field where it comes to that item on the audit. The audit's got 6 categories. General 1 is company details, people responsible for health and safety, looking on the HSE notices website, and accident history of the company to find out if there's any issues there. Part 2 is financial and legal requirements. So are you appointing a bona fide safety netting company? How are the employees employed? How do they contract? How they've got the right tax paperwork in place? Do they hold operators' licences if they're going to be bringing vehicles to site, or making sure that the public liability insurance is up to date? As an example, we then go into the main part of the audit, and as you can see there, the 4 categories, and the purple section in each category is the Facet minimum standard. Part 3 is health and safety and goes beyond Appendix 4. Talking about the policy, the organisation, people responsible for health and safety at director level. Do they have competent advice in the company and external? How training is arranged? How their activities are monitored and audits are carried out? How they involve their workforce and engage with their workforce? What happens when things go wrong and they do have an accident? How are they reported and investigated? If they subcontract their work, one of the rules within Facet is if they're subcontracting safety netting, they can only subcontract to another Facet safety netting company. So it can't be that you appoint a Facet member and then they go and subcontract it out to another one-man band with a few nets in the back of a van. There are also, in the health and safety section, requirements that have come in the industry in recent months and years. The UKCG's training standard for having directors trained to the IOSH directing safely level has been built in already prior to the UKCG standard coming alive. Part 4 is about quality, safety net inspections, policies, procedures, how to repair nets, how to ensure nets are tested in accordance with the written scheme, how inspection regimes are maintained, and how the nets are handed over. So prior to you putting people to work on site, you know that the nets are handed over correctly. One thing as well is Facet produce a lot of guidance and best practice, and how this information is actually passed back onto the workforce. It's all right being posted on the website, it's all right the company knowing, but how does the guy know that on January the 1st this year they outlawed an activity called pinning, which everybody knew about? So the audit also checks that. Environment's also covered in the audit, but to a small degree. It's very difficult for a safety netting company to meet all the expectations of a major contractor. There are 3 conform notices that can be issued. A Category 1 notice would be a major ball stopper. You can't come and join the federation, or you're on notice. Category 2 could be something like the health and safety policy is 2 years old and needs to be reviewed, so that can be done something over the line. But for Category 1 and Category 2, the company has to forward a report to the board or be re-inspected. And a Category 3 is how best practice is passed out. So when selecting a competent netting contractor, always use the company that are Facet registered as members, and there's a list on the website. A card doesn't mean that you're a member of Facet. One benefit for me is you've got the right to complain to him. That if one of their members does something wrong, you can ask the board for their information and their comment on what the situation is. Things have gone wrong in the past. There's an example of CDM 007 about a poor appointment of a roofing contractor who subcontracted out, and that's an extract in CDM approved code of practice. When you really get things wrong, you can be personally prosecuted. And in the case of this one, the lady here who selected a subcontractor on cost was fined £15,000 due to an outbreak of Legionella. Things do go right. That this was a case in 2011 when two guys were knocked off the roof when a freak gust of wind hit the two roofers and knocked them into the safety netting that was installed by a facet member, and they were brought down to the ground safely. So in summary, remember, it's not you that's probably going to need the safety netting, it's your colleagues, it's Chris. And I would advise everybody to engage a facet member for the safety netting needs. Thank you.